The previous episode gave an introduction to objects. This episode is going to take that knowledge and expand upon it by explaining what classes are and what the makeup of a class is. The first concept involving classes is scope. Scope determines what variables, methods, and even entire classes can be accessed by what. The best way to learn how scope works is to see an example of it in action, which requires a class. Let's take a look at this code. Compared to what we've done so far, this may appear to be a lot of complicated code, but we're not interested in what it does right now. The main thing we're looking at here is scope. Notice lines 17 and 18. They are simply just variables that are being declared. The only difference is the private keyword before them. This makes it so that you can only access these values from within the class. This is important because it could aid in preventing someone with malicious intent, or yourself on accident, from modifying important values. If you were to create a new person object and attempted to modify these values, well, you couldn't. You'd get a compile error. Now let's look at this section of the code. The public keyword is the opposite of the private keyword. It allows the method or variable to be accessed from outside of the class, such as a new object instance variable of the class. Now that we've discussed some basics about scope, let's change our focus to classes. Since we'll be analyzing the meaning of the code, we're going to look at a more simplified version of the person class. Within the person class declaration is what is known as a constructor, public person. There's nothing inside of it now, but just know that whenever a new person object is declared, the code within here is executed. Now let's look at a method within the person class. Methods are simply blocks of code that you, or the user, depending on what you need, tell when to execute. The origin of the word void in the method declaration is because of what gets returned, and because methods don't return a value, it's void. Which leads us to functions. Functions are similar to methods, where the only difference is that they return a value. It's important to know that the data type returned is within the declaration of the function, so you can't have the keyword int in the declaration and return a string value. Also, functions need to return a value on all paths of the code, which is reflected through the return statement. In this episode, we learned the basics of how a class is laid out and discussed scope. Next time, we will discuss creating methods, overloading them, and calling them from an object.